No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 158. Happy Friday. Surgey Nigel Farage has made his position clear. No deal with the Tories, no matter what. He'll save Britain on his own.
Today's figures are truly astonishing. They've got us topping the polls at 29%, with the Conservatives way down at 18%. Have a look at this map. That's the prediction for the number of seats we would win. The message that's coming from this is very, very clear. Not only do we have momentum, but if you want to beat Labour, if you want to get them out at the next general election, don't waste your vote with the Conservatives.
And he went on to say, this could be Britain's last chance. But do you believe him? And is such an intransigent position sustainable, especially when the man who should be leading the Conservatives is now openly hinting at a deal?
Reform themselves have said they don't want to do it.
You're splitting the Reform vote.
Reform has said repeatedly.
Oh, God,
that they have
they're going to
no,
say that
well,
now.
Said, well,
I mean, you know, that's the art of the deal, isn't it? They're good negotiators.
Said they have no intention of doing this. Kemi has said that she doesn't want to do it either. We are two separate.
You've got to have a non-aggression pact at the very least, right?
My take on that and Robert Jenrick's answer coming up in the digest next. Then Connor Tomlinson is back for his unparalleled analysis. Also coming up on the show today, why centrist dads like Alastair Campbell, Rory, Stewart and Ed Balls are now the most toxic force in British politics. And woke ITV launches a deranged witch hunt against one of its own biggest stars. Now, this is effectively for telling dirty jokes that they used to encourage on air, all while, of course, ignoring the rape gang scandal. So I'll tell you all about what's going on with ITV and Gino D'Acampo later in the show. Then in the Uncancelled After Show on Substack, a bombshell new royal book, wow, this is big, has made shocking claims about Meghan Markle flirting with Prince William during her time in the royal family. Prince Harry's biographer, Angela Levin, who covered it all, is going to be here to do a deep dive on this bombshell new book. You can sign up, by the way, to watch www.outspoken.live. Now, you know it is the end of the week, so we will be naming the worst Briton in the world this week. As you know, we take your winners from Union Jackass on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday and put it into a mega poll in the YouTube community section. My goodness, so far, over 30,000 votes. You guys are amazing. This is a genuine community. And you can still go in and vote. It's in the posts section on the Dan Wootton Outspoken page. The nominees from Monday, Nicola Marfleet, the governor of HMP Woodhill, that's over Tommy Robinson, remaining in solitary. From Tuesday, Angela Rayner. From Wednesday, Keir Starmer. And from yesterday, Rachel Reeves for destroying the economy. So we will be naming the worst Briton in the world and hearing some of your thoughts at the end of the show. But now, let's go. The numbers are extraordinary. Now, not at all a surprise to me, but still astonishing. So let's just be clear, right? The uni party is over. Finito. The two-party system is about to be smashed. And the deep state, the MSM, and the Westminster class, they can't stop this one. As Trump said, it's going to be too big to rig. So here are these new numbers from Find Out Now, showing Reform 4 points clear of Labour at number one, but devastatingly for Kemi Badenoch's faltering leadership, and this is the crucial thing in terms of today, 11 points ahead of the dying Tories. So for the first time, Nigel isn't even pretending to hide his expectation that something big is happening in Britain.
Now, you might say it's just one poll, and a poll is a snapshot, not a prediction. All true. But Find Out Now have been the most accurate pollers on reform. They've led the way. Today's figures are truly astonishing. They've got us topping the polls at 29%, with the Conservatives way down at 18. Have a look at this map. That's the prediction for the number of seats we would win. The message that's coming from this is very, very clear. Not only do we have momentum, but if you want to beat Labour, if you want to get them out at the next general election, don't waste your vote with the Conservatives. Come with a winning team, join Reform UK, be part of the People's Army. We might be your last hope.
And that's a big call, isn't it? Your last hope. Your last hope to save Britain. So I guess the idea is, even if you might disagree with Nigel on, I don't know, for example, the issue of mass deportations or demographic change or Islam or Tommy Robinson, is he still the last hope? And do we need to put some of those objections aside? What's fascinating is all of a sudden the questions Richard Tice used to ask, with his tongue, I think, firmly in cheek, are now being seriously put to senior Tory figures. When are you going to step aside to stop dividing the vote on the right? Robert Jenrick, who should be Conservative leader, has certainly set the cat amongst the pigeons by making it clear he doesn't rule out a Reform Conservative pact.
With Reform, at some point they are going to be consistently ahead of you in the polls. At what point did the Tory party say, you know what, if you add up Reform and the Conservatives, you're on 45, 50% of the market. Why don't you do a deal?
Well, firstly, Reform themselves have said they don't want to do it.
You're splitting the Reform vote.
Reform has said repeatedly
that they have they're going to say that now. That's the art of the deal, isn't it? They're good negotiators.
Said they have no intention of doing this. Kemi has said that she doesn't want to do it either. We are two separate.
You've got to have a non-aggression pact at the very least, right?
My whole mission is to bring home all the small C Conservatives in this country back to the Conservative Party. We should be their natural home. We're not at the moment because of the mistakes that we made in office, the very serious mistakes. It can be done.
Final question. Would you be doing better in the polls if you were the leader of the opposition?
Look, Kemi is our leader.
Go on.
I stood.
That's not our. Come on. That's a politician's answer.
I stood to be leader.
Would the Tories be better in the polls if you were the leader?
It's a nice question to ask.
Was that a no? I think I heard a no.
But look, Kemi is our leader. I chose to serve in the shadow cabinet because I believe that she can be a success and she's working extremely hard. I think it's going to be a long road. That is what we have to accept.
Robert Jenrick would not be doing better than Kemi Badenoch.
Harry, look, what we're trying to do here is turn the Conservative Party around under Kemi's leadership, and I'm here to support her in everything that
I thought you were a straight-talking, honest kind of guy, but there we go. Apologies answer. Robert Jenrick, thank you.
So, I mean, let's just move on from those pathetic Westminster parlour games because that doesn't matter. What matters to me is that Robert Jenrick could be the future of the Conservative Party, and it's very clear that he understands the only way that the Conservative Party has a future is with some sort of deal with Nigel Farage. So cue immediate panic from the uni party. So a Labour spokesperson quickly weighed in, telling The Sun, the cat is out the bag. The Tories won't rule out doing a dodgy backroom deal with Reform. The Conservatives wrecked public services, and Nigel Farage plans to charge NHS patients for thousands of routine treatments. Just imagine what they'd do together. Labour's plan for change is delivering investment and Reform to deliver growth, put more money in people's pockets and to secure Britain's borders. I mean, those claims are completely laughable, by the way. The economy is in dire straits. The borders are wide open. The invasion continues. But Kemi's Tories, I think we need to call them Kemi's troubled Tories at the moment, responded unconvincingly, saying reports of a Tory-Reform pact are complete and utter nonsense. The Conservative Party will not negotiate with people who want to destroy us. Obviously, the point of a pact would be Farage no longer wanting to destroy the Conservative Party. But not everyone within Reform is so keen on the current fighting talk, and this really interested me yesterday. Longtime Conservative figurehead Tim Montgomery, whose defection caused shockwaves in Westminster, has suggested there's some sort of arrogance within the Reform leadership, presumably referring to Farage and the chairman Zia Youssef, who certainly has been having some fun with Labour's membership troubles over the past week. But watch what Tim Montgomery told our friend Alex Phillips.
The latest poll that's come out this afternoon, but the Tories are on 18 or 19%, certainly below 20, and Reform are up to 29. Woo. So you're not looking at Reform narrowly ahead now. You know, the whole Conservative sort of thing about waiting, not having any policies, waiting for Reform to implode, it ain't working.
It's not going to work.
It ain't working.
No.
And I'm on this WhatsApp group with sort of fellow Conservative commentators, and they don't really like the Reform Party, and they don't really like what I've done. They're relatively polite to me because they've seen, I'm a friend, but they really don't like Reform, and they can't hide it for very long. And I said, the thing is, the split on the right is real, and you're trying to pretend it's going to go away, and the Tory party are automatically going to sort of revert to the position they've always had, which is the primary party of the right. I said, you're out of touch.
Why don't they like Reform? Because this is one thing I try to understand.
Yeah.
When people have such an aversion, I'm like, why?
I think there's a whole combination of reasons, and I think one thing I have noticed, Alex, is there is a difference between the Reform member and the Reform leadership. The Reform members are very much like how I used to know the Conservative Party all through my life, sort of really ordinary mainstream people.
Proper people.
One criticism I would make of the Reform leadership is I think there's a bit of a cockiness to them at the moment.
It's an interesting one. It depends how you look at it. I mean, I don't mind the cockiness when it comes to the polls. I guess where I have a problem is this idea that, the only reason we didn't do well at the last election is because we had some wrong-uns in our mix who may have tweeted something positive about Tommy Robinson in 2012. I don't like that approach, and I do think that approach is arrogant. But I think what we can say, and what we can all agree, is that major change is coming nonetheless. As Connor Tomlinson wrote this week for Courage Media, thanks to the last Conservative and current Labour government, the UK will have at least 9 million immigrants added to its population by 2032. Also, a third of babies born in Britain are to immigrant mothers and more to second-generation immigrants. Mohammed is the most common baby name in the UK. And yet some Conservatives are still fighting the lost cause of trying to convince you that this is a good thing. If newcomers are not required to buy into our civilization and can instead live in ethno-cultural silos at odds with the host population, then Britain ceases to be a nation. So maybe Nigel Farage is indeed right, that he is the UK's last hope. And Connor Tomlinson joins me now. And Connor is, of course, the host of Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters and the brilliant Deprogrammed podcast with the New Culture Forum. Connor, so great to have you here. Do you agree with Nigel Farage, given what you wrote in Courage Media, do you agree with Nigel Farage that actually Reform UK could now be the UK's last hope?
Well, I don't see much change coming from the Conservative Party. I know Kemi Badenoch announced a new policy based on Sam Bidwell's work over at the Adam Smith Institute about indefinite leave to remain. For those who don't know, by the way, because it turns out that Boris Johnson's entire team didn't know, as I've heard, if you were in the country, of the UK, for 5 years, no matter how much you contribute in taxes, no matter what visa you had to get here, you can apply for indefinite leave to remain, which means that you are allowed to just stay in the country. You don't need to keep updating your visa. You don't need to enter a different kind of employment, and you can claim social housing benefits and use the NHS as you so please. And 95% of all visas given to Boris wave migrants, so the massive million migrants a year, mainly from the third world, that have happened since 2021, 95% of those are non-taxpayers. So they are net drains. And the first wave of them from 2021 will get indefinite leave to remain next year. So Kemi Badenoch said, well, in 2029, when we win, we'll up it from 5 years to 10 years, and we'll make sure that anyone who entered illegally or hasn't paid tax will not be able to apply for ILR. The recommendations given to her, and I know this for a fact, were to restrict ILR to a number of countries that are net tax contributors and close to our culture, so they're easier to assimilate, and it was to be 15 years rather than 10 years. Don't know why she decided not to restrict it to certain countries. Don't know why she knocked 5 years off and made the policy smaller. And it's that kind of poor instinct. And it's also the same kind of poor instinct of appointing Priti Patel, your foreign secretary, when she was the architect of said Boris wave and decided to defend her immigration record, saying critics like you and me, Dan, should apologise to her for bringing up the fact that 95% of immigrants are not tax contributors, for example. It's those kind of instincts that show that the Conservative Party is in a death spiral. It's why their headquarters looks to be shutting down. It's why they're dismissing their activists. It's why they can't seem to win for losing these days. And it's why Robert Jenrick, one, couldn't deny the fact that were he leading, they'd be rising in the polls, because he'd be doing a right-wing arms race with Reform right now. But two, it's why Robert Jenrick was refusing to rule out a pact with Reform, because you can read that as him heating up the pool before he decides to dive in, whether or not his party decides to follow him. Now, as far as Reform go, I actually agree with Tim Montgomery, which I know is surprising because Tim might have been a bit soft over the years. But what Tim, I think, is saying is that he is cautioning against Reform buying the polls, because the polls can be fickle. Polls try to shape public opinion as much as they register public opinion. And at the moment, because the Labour Party is deciding to respond to things like the Southport murders and the grooming gangs with suggesting a council on Islamophobia that criminalise even conversations about it, it's not that hard to outpace them and the Conservatives. What I think Tim is doing is warning of the same thing that I did in my previous critic column in November, which Richard Tice called garbage, and then his own voters turned around and said, well, hang on, that sounds a bit cocky. I don't like that. It's saying that you want to be Trump too, not Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton said, it's our time, she deserves it, and basically stepped on an electoral rake and has never recovered ever since. You don't want to buy your own hype and think that victory is inevitable because the other guy looks non-credible. What you want to be is Trump term 2. You want to have a massive folder of legislation to sign on day one. You want to present a credible alternative to the histrionic failures that are trying to run against you. And then when you win with the popular consent of the public, then you actually deliver on your promises. And so I think that's maybe what Tim's cautioning. Put policy over polls.
Yeah, and I would also say, I guess, from a political point of view, Connor, don't believe that these people do not want to destroy you. I think that was the great thing about the recent Trump campaign. He went in with his eyes wide open, and I do still believe that sometimes Farage and Tice and Yusuf believe that they can get the deep state on side, that they can work within the current system. And that frustrates me. I saw them saying earlier this week, oh, it will be much more difficult for us than Trump because we've got to deal with the British deep state, effectively, the civil service, whatever you want to call it. But I would argue surely part of the policy platform should be dismantling that deep state, because otherwise you're not going to be able to do whatever you say to the people that you will be doing. And we've seen that time and again, haven't we, with Boris and, of course, Liz Truss.
Yeah, it shouldn't take a assassination attempt, as it did with Trump, to alert you to the fact that politics is existential. These people that are embedded in the Home Office, take the Islamic Network, for example, or Dame Sarah Khan, the government's former anti-extremism advisor, who said that Nigel Farage should be put on a cabinet office watch list because he said that two-tier policing is real. I mean, you only have to read the Alexis J report, for example, to know that it's certainly real, to do with the grooming gangs. Those people would rather see him dead than victorious. And so having his MPs, like Richard Tice, come out and say, congratulations to Kay Burley on her retirement from Sky News. It's like, these people hate you. They are your enemy. They are not to be conciliatory clapped as they walk out the building. You should be cheering as they pack up their belongings in a small cardboard box because they can no longer call you racist and try and put a target on your head. So hopefully, what I hope Reform is doing is that lots of people behind the scenes that don't do interviews like this are listening to people who are sliding articles and pre-drafted bits of legislation in front of them saying, okay, here's the elements of the British deep state. Here's how the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act empowered the civil service and put the state on rails so these activists in the civil service can do whatever they want, no matter what the government of the day is. Here's the Equality Act, which prevents you from firing them and creates all these little fifth columns of identity groups like the LGBT activist network or the Islamic network in the Home Office that influence policy. Here's the Charities Act of 2011 that ensures that the government has to give taxpayer money to charities that position themselves as community leaders or enhancing community tensions or doing equality and diversity. You know, the same stuff that Doge is ripping up right now. I hope Reform have got plans, as Rupert Lowe has suggested, for a great repeal or maybe a restoration act so we can restore the British state to its former glory, and to do a Doge UK to cut all that waste. And it seems like some indications have been made that this is on their radar. I just hope that people are putting in the proper pen to paper work over the next few years so that on day one, they can just sign the legislation and put us back on the right track.
Yes, by the way, I'm quite glad. I mean, look, I like Richard Tyson so many ways, but I am quite glad you raised the post on X about Kay Burley, right? Because I saw that earlier this week and I was like, Richard, what are you doing? Why? Like, when are you going to understand that the MSM are never going to accept you? And what's so funny, Connor, is I'm just looking through now and look at the responses. Debbie Eaton just posted the vomit emoji. Mike's going like that. Steve writes, that's like saying you were lucky to have a root canal this week. Snoffer said, glad you like her. Many haven't forgotten her hypocrisy during COVID. I mean, it goes on and on and on, doesn't it? And I do think that's the misunderstanding. And I think Nigel has that misunderstanding too. He thinks by being accessible to the media, he can turn around their deep hatred, and he won't.
Kay Burley specifically, spoke untruths on air about my Liz Truss interview, and then deleted the post, but didn't send me an apology or anything. So she was more than happy to be an ill-informed propagandist on the airwaves and suffer no reputational damage. So the idea that this person can be brought on side, or even better, I think the idea that Richard Tice should revel in the fact that Kay Burley might have a positive opinion of him one day if he's nice enough to her. No, you should be happy that these people have a negative opinion of you. Like, I wear that hope not hate hit piece as a badge of honor, because if those awful communists who have decided to try and ruin my country liked me, I would be doing something wrong. Trump has that opinion of the media. If CNN were writing positive stories on him, he would have to reassess his position. And so I think Reform should take that approach. They should treat the media as a hostile interlocutor and not try to seek their approval, nor pat them on their back as they're on their way out the door, because Kay Burley can see that Sky News itself is a sinking ship because they've burned all their credibility in the last few years.
And actually, I think it is worth just looking at the different treatment that Kemi Badenoch gets from the mainstream media, although I'm also interested to know whether you think that she is dealing with the very obvious Reform UK threat in the right way. This was a big interview she did this week, which actually got a lot of coverage on the flagship bulletin on the British Bashing Corporation watch.
And we need to make sure that we are not creating an automatic right to British citizenship. It is something that's really special.
Are you panicking about Nigel Farage? Because when I speak to plenty of your colleagues privately, they are.
We need to make sure that we understand what is going wrong, and that is that we've just been kicked out of government. The public aren't just going to rush back to us because Labour is doing badly. We knew they'd do badly. We need to rebuild trust with the public. So of course they will put their vote with the protest party.
He's an existential threat, isn't he, to the Conservative Party, Nigel Farage?
Every party is an existential threat to the Conservatives. We are in a competitive political environment, and there's no point complaining about what other people are doing. We have to make sure that we're offering the best product. I think changing the rules to indefinite leave to remain is one of the ways that we can do that.
Are you convinced, Connor Tomlinson?
Well, changing the rules in 4 years, I mean, currently she has no prospect of getting into government anyway, judging by the polls, but changing the rules in 4 years when the millions of people have already settled here under indefinite leave to remain rules, it won't matter. She should be currently lobbying Yvette Cooper to just sign this way, because she doesn't actually have to amend the Nationality and Borders Act to do this. She doesn't have to change the law. She can just write a letter as the Home Secretary and change this overnight. So she should be saying, well, if you want to bring down immigration, why don't you just do that now? You can do that by fiat as Home Secretary. Why aren't you? She should be hammering her on this. But I don't think Kemi is an effective rhetorician. Any time that she writes an article or well, some of her more effective articles are probably written by Spads, but there you go. Anytime she herself writes an article or drafts a tweet or gives an interview, her words just sound hollow and kind of contentless, and she constantly misses open goals. I mean, I'm not just referring to the idea that she accused Reform UK of manufacturing the membership numbers and now still hasn't properly apologised. The other day, I just accidentally ratioed her on one of her tweets because she referred to the UK as a project. Now, nobody who feels like this is their home, their country, that they would die to defend their family in this green and pleasant land, thinks of it as a project that any old technocrat can come to and just tinker with a passing fascination with it. And I just put my homeland as not a country, Kemi, and the fact that you don't feel that way is evident by your language. And me, with an infinitesimally small account, got far more engagement. Now, I'm not saying that Twitter ratios convert into actual real politics, but it does convey this kind of mimetic loserness. Like, Trump was not getting ratioed on his own tweets. Nigel Farage does not get ratioed on his own tweets. And it's because they move through the world as if the forces of history are kind of swirling around them. Kemi just doesn't have that. I would honestly sooner expect to eat my shoes than her becoming Prime Minister.
Okay, well, please, I really hope you don't have to do that, especially if they haven't been cleaned in a while. Breaking right now, Connor Tomlinson has written that Nigel Farage has a mandate from heaven to become the next Prime Minister of the UK. And what is fascinating looking at what's gone on this week is there has been a massive 180 in terms of how the Labour Party is now dealing with Farage. It is going to be a full throttled attack. But the problem is, and you can see from what I'm about to show you in the House of Commons, Nigel just loves it.
To ask the Prime Minister for some advice, what do I say to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including...
Get on with... No, you've got it. No, we're not both standing at the same. Look, I need a quick question, then I can get you the answer. Come on.
What do I say, Prime Minister, to 25,000 constituents in Clacton, including 99-year-old Jim O'Dwyer, who flew a full set of missions on Lancaster bombers as tail end Charlie, as they're losing their winter fuel allowance, feeling the pinch, whilst at the same time we're prepared to give away a military base and pay £18 billion for the privilege of doing so.
Mr. Speaker, he talks of panic. The only panic is people using the NHS who know that under his policy he wants to charge them for using the NHS. And what he should say to the people of Clacton when he finally finds Clacton is that they should vote Labour because we're stabilising the economy and boosting the Dems.
Mr. Speaker, many of my...
And as Belinda de Lucy, close ally of Farage, former Brexit MEP, posted, the heckling, disrespect and shouting over Nigel Farage at PMQs is a gift to reform. A clear sign the establishment sees Nigel and team as a major threat to their grip on power. A political revolution is on its way and they can't stop it. So Connor Tomlinson joins me now. Connor, this was an absolutely fascinating piece from you. And I think it's best for me to leave it to you to describe why you believe Farage may have the mandate from heaven.
Well, first, I must remark upon that clip that you just showed, Dan. It's no wonder that Keir Starmer is so keen to do an AI deal in the UK, because it seems that he's using AI to write both his responses and his blooming press statements. But there you go. So as for Farage, I mean, the title of the piece is, does Nigel Farage have the mandate of heaven? And it's a reference to an old Chinese phrase. They said that the mandate of heaven is a description for unforeseen historical forces that confer legitimacy upon a king. It's like he has the mandate from heaven, hence why he should rule. And I was thinking about this in the light of two events. One, I was out in Washington, D.C. with our mutual friend Liz Truss, and Farage told the room that he could be prime minister, slip of the tongue, by 2029. Now, we can all be cynical about that and say that obviously every single political party has to say that because they have to live up to their own hype and sort of manufacture consent for their own legitimacy and have people vote for them. But then the thing that convinced me was not that bluster in that particular drinks reception or even the polls that show Reformer at the top, but it was this strangely calm This Morning interview with Ben and Kat Deely. Can't remember all the details of the host names, but right beforehand, the thing that came out of it was that Farage on the Lunar New Year was ambushed by this Chinese lion costume. And so that overshadowed the contents of the interview. And I'm not shocked that it did, because the interview was weirdly non-combative. They were treating Farage like he was, Hugh Grant's prime minister in Love Actually. It's just sort of part of the political furniture now. He was sitting there saying that the population explosion is going to ruin the country and we need massive immigration reform. And they weren't tearing their hair out. And the typical headlines didn't ensue that, Nigel Farage is going to crawl out from under the bed of every migrant child and smother them with his bare hands. Instead, it was just normal. And so it felt very much like the same vibe shift that I was seeing in Washington, D.C., where people were walking around with MAGA hats, open carrying Trump paraphernalia, as it were, without fear of violent reprisal. Trumpism was in the ascendant, and it became in the ascendant just because it was so self-evident problems of America were affecting ordinary Americans that Trump became the sensible option. And it feels like now, yes, a combination of the polls, but also the fact that the media aren't shrieking and screaming as much as they were about some of the things that Farage is saying, even though he's still saying some very confident things that we would like him to say. It feels like the mandate of heaven, the historical forces, are settling upon Farage as ascending to Downing Street when it comes time by 2029.
I have to say, this interview, Connor, you are so right to point to it, because it was completely striking for not what happened within the interview, but the fact that the interview was so anodyne, was so boring. It's exactly the type of treatment that woke ITV has always given on its daytime shows to Nicola Sturgeon, for example, a politician who they consider non-threatening and who they view as a celebrity rather than a threat. There was no hard challenge of Farage whatsoever. I could actually see his face, and it was like, when's it coming? When's it coming? You know, when are they going to come for me? And it just didn't. And I think that is a real change in the fact that he is now a mainstream figure. Of course, a lot of the woke people at ITV kind of were horrified by the fact that he said within the interview he thinks that it was his appearance on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here that actually resulted in that change.
Yeah, it's not that I don't think they have taken down the dartboard with Nigel Farage's face on it in the ITV studio or anything, but in this particular interview, he was allowed to just sit there with his novelty socks on and laugh everything off. And what was most telling is when they did launch a loaded question at him about Elon Musk saying that he should no longer be the leader of Reform UK over their disagreement about the treatment of Tommy Robinson, rather than in previous interviews where Farage got a little bit defensive. We all know his LBC interview where he accused Robinson of something he didn't do via a slip of the tongue. Rather than get defensive, he just brushed it off. He successfully spun it, actually, into saying that the world's richest man won't make me compromise on my principles. So whether or not you think that was the right thing for Farage to say, he positioned himself as the unassailable, confident person in the room, and the interviewers were coming to him rather than him trying to seek the limelight. And the same thing has happened in the Commons. Pretty much any time he's asked a question, Farage has been very good with all of his questions prepared in the Commons and all of his various debates. It seems like he makes the right interventions at the right time with complete clarity and laughs off any unwelcome interruption and petty squabbling and heckling by the school children on the opposite benches. And that's not an exaggeration, by the way. Look at some of the Labour MPs. Literally, they're right out of university. He just laughs that off, and he looks like the man of the moment. Now, we might still say Nigel Farage has some ability to occupy some vacant room in the right of the Overton window, with the Conservatives running to the left constantly. The left side is a very crowded market these days, and Reform has the opportunity to be a proper national populist patriotic party, especially since Donald Trump has proven not only how popular these policies are, but the fact that they can work. And we might still say Nigel needs some guidance. There is some room for encouragement with Reform. There's the need for new faces, new voices, new policies to be proposed. But there are also some encouraging signs on that front, because when Donald Trump and Tom Homan, the bulldog that he's put in charge of ICE, are now deporting hundreds of people a day of the violent foreign criminals that have invaded the US under the Biden administration, Farage decided to do a direct-to-camera address and say, look, our countries are different, but the principle is the same. And it seems like he and Rupert Lowe are now getting on the same page about the strength of necessary immigration policy to deal with the crisis in this country. So I'm seeing encouraging signs, not just from Reform in terms of rhetoric and policy, which is hardening up as we would like them to, but also in this growing self-confidence that, yeah, we might actually be able to do this thing.
And look, there are lots of signs that this is a bigger change. For example, Connor, just this afternoon, a Labour councillor who, and in fact, she was the sole Labour representative on the Ashfield District Council, confirming that she has defected to Reform UK. Now, there is Cathy Mason alongside Lee Anderson. And of course, that journey, that switch mirrors Lee Anderson's. I mean, he was a staff member, a Labour staff member for Gloria Di Piero, and then ended up replacing her as a Conservative MP. So while you can just say, okay, this is one councillor, it is indicative of a bigger change that's coming, isn't it?
I will caution Reform over this. It's encouraging that we're seeing so many people take the lead on a political realignment, and that is really what's happening. But without leaking any private communications, I have warned to sympathetic senior ears in Reform to be discerning as to who you accept as a defector. Someone like, as previously mentioned, Robert Jenrick, who was literally sitting in a teal tie during that Sun interview, I happened to notice. Sure, he might be a worthy asset to the cause. The same with Suella Braverman, particularly over this Chagos deal, given that Mauritius is close to her heart and her family history. But someone like Marco Longhi, who was fighting in Rupert Lowe's seat when he was a Brexit Party MEP and didn't have great words for the beloved Mr. Lowe himself. One, I don't know if it was a wise admission, and two, it shouldn't have been announced like they just acquired a star striker in a football trade. The same with, for example, Priti Patel. Now, Priti Patel has been a long-time friend of Nigel Farage, as we remember, perhaps a little bit sorely, Dan, that they would do karaoke together at the GB News events. Now, I'm not saying that Farage can't be friendly with Patel. I certainly wouldn't, after the treason that she's wrought on this country by using 250,000 Indians every year as, quote, living bridges to the Modi regime under her immigration policy. But the best thing that Patel ever did was defend that immigration policy on the Sun, because it makes her too radioactive for Reform to accept. But the question I always had before she did that is, would Priti Patel be welcome in Reform, despite doing more damage to this country through her immigration policy than someone like Tommy Robinson, who has already been told categorically no without ever asking to join? So I think they need to be very careful about, from whichever party it may be, Labour, Conservatives alike, it's not going to be any Lib Dems, is it, to apply stringent criteria on who should be allowed in, because some will be benefits to Reform and some will not.
Make sure they're not Carreras, make sure they're doing it for the right reason. I will just quickly read out what Lee Anderson had to say, by the way, about Cathy Mason joining, because he's certainly not underplaying this. Lee said, "This is a seismic moment for Reform UK. The first Labour councillor has defected to us today, and it's happened in the capital of common sense, Ashfield. Cathy will be the first of many to join Reform UK from Labour, and she will be one of millions to leave Labour to vote for Reform UK at the next general election." Now, when people tend to talk about who is the most toxic in British politics, you would expect them to predictably say Nigel Farage, Tommy Robinson, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. You know, they pull out all of the usual suspects. But in fact, there is a growing new thesis that actually it's centrist dads like Rory Stewart, who were previously a byword for bland, but are actually now the toxic politicians and journalists once treated as the grown-ups in the room. And I'll go into this article in more detail in just a moment, but first, Rory Stewart had something to say to our Connor Tomlinson about this, about that this week, because Rory posted, "Am I the left now?" And Connor made the point back on X, endorsed Kamala Harris, said we should take in hundreds of thousands of third world migrants, wants to send millions in my tax money to Africa, told The Guardian you would vote Lib Dems or Green. What exactly do you want to conserve, Rory? What about you is right wing? And of course, it's not just Rory Stewart, it's his co-host, Alastair Campbell, on The Rest is Politics, it's the fake news agents, it's all of the folk that got together for the Channel 4 election night, and it's George Osborne and Ed Balls. And I would argue, Connor, that as they see their power and their domination slipping away, they are becoming increasingly toxic. I believe they are the toxic force in British politics now. Do you think so?
Well, if one were to get things as wrong as Campbell and Stewart have repeatedly, publicly, on a podcast which has the arrogance to name itself The Rest is Politics, as if everything's a settled silence and the rest is just some sort of sporting discussion between us. If we were just so wrong on all of our predictions, it would be a time to stop, reflect and reassess, right? But no, instead, Rory Stewart has decided that like Principal Skinner in The Simpsons, no, it's not me, it's all the children that are wrong. And instead, rather than, my prediction that Kamala Harris would win over the swathes of the American public with her amazing policies and endearing laugh, no, it wasn't that my predictions are aging like milk. Instead, it's that I'm just too much of a good person and an optimist to really understand the depths of depravity that the American public are capable of voting for. So Rory Stewart decided to pick a fight with J.D. Vance as well. This is something about his right-wing credentials, where he was saying that J.D. Vance doesn't understand the Christian concept of love, because Vance was saying, as a Christian, you're meant to love your family, and then you have sort of these concentric circles out. So the further out you get, the less love you're capable of applying, right? So you know your family best, you know your friends, you know your community, your church congregation, maybe your wider nation. But when it gets to the international stage, you don't know these people, so it's kind of impossible to will their good because you don't know what's best for them. And Rory Stewart thought, no, instead, we should be sending loads of foreign aid to Africa and all the other ridiculous projects like, transgender operas that USAID was funding. I'm not joking about that, by the way. And so you're not a Christian for not wanting that. Now, bear in mind, this sort of concept as well is also similar in Jewish theology. Yoram Hazony has written about this in Conservatism, A Rediscovery. So it's in both the New and Old Testaments. And I wouldn't pick a fight with J.D. Vance on theology or politics for that matter, Rory, considering he seems to be trouncing you on both. But I replied to Rory under that particular post with a nifty little graph that I took from a study by Jonathan Haidt, the author of The Righteous Mind. And it shows that conservatives care most about their family and least about everything else. And liberals, despite Rory calling himself a conservative, he is very liberal, as you can see from his voting record and his positions, care more about things like space rocks and plants and the universe in general than their own immediate family. So always remember, when you're arguing with a type like Rory Stewart, who keeps getting these things wrong, it's because his immediate priorities are boulders floating around the rings of Saturn rather than his own family or yours.
I'll take you through some of this article, Connor, which was by George Chesterton in the Daily Telegraph. And he wrote, once a life raft for the politically homeless, being a centrist dad now looks like an increasingly redundant and even potentially toxic concept. First identified back in 2017, the point of being a centrist dad was to emphasize moderation, and maturity between the two poles of Jeremy Corbyn's radicalized Labour and the popularism that led to Brexit. But he went on to say, probably the most striking example of the misplaced confidence of centrist dads was Stewart's prediction that Kamala Harris, as you pointed out, Connor, would win the US election. The former Conservative MP and minister is the centrist dad par excellence, as every Labour supporter's favourite Tory, given that he was seen to oppose the rise of the populism embodied by his fellow Etonian Boris Johnson. But Stewart's certainty over Trump's demise was seen by many to epitomise the journey centrist dads have taken, from the well-informed arbiters of truth to men unable or unwilling to judge political reality. The gap between his 5 stated reasons for a Harris victory and the actual results widened to a chasm. And then what I love about this is that centrism is no longer considered sexy. So Glenn O'Hara, who's the author of an upcoming book, New Labour, New Britain, is quoted in this piece saying that podcasts such as Rory Stewart and Alastair Campbell's are so successful that that's almost a problem in itself. They can be a bit teeth-grating. And also the Prime Minister has become like an end-of-game level centrist dad. He always looks like a disappointed headmaster. What do you think of that summation, Connor?
Well, I think that as a person under the age of 45, I would be more likely to listen to the rest of politics than I would if I was subjected to it as a kind of torture in some far-off lands prison camp. I would also point to Charlotte Gill's work that shows that they're beneficiaries of a left-wing patronage network, as are the newsagents and James O'Brien and Carol Vorderman and all sorts of other stooges, which provide the stilts upon which the nonsense of the progressive narrative rests, and those stilts are looking very, very wobbly. But why do I say all that? Well, look at what the world that the types of Rory Stewart and Alastair Campbell have delivered us, that failed ventures overseas, foreign interventions that have been waged unsuccessfully at the expense of ensuring that our land at home is maintained properly. Our high streets are dilapidated, the roads are full of potholes, the bins don't collected. The taxes are the highest since 1948. And then we decided that after invading all of those lands and bombing them to kingdom come, we thought, well, the locals won't have any problems with us, so why don't we import them by the blooming millions? And Rory Stewart said on his recent trigonometry interview that we should take 1% of our population as refugees every year. That's 700,000, by the way, and it would only go up as the population would increase. Bright idea, Rory. Thank you very much. So if you wonder why people don't like the centrist dads, the chinos, the CINOs, Conservatives in name only, as Suella Braverman said, and it's funny because they actually do wear chinos, it's because they are physically weak, mentally weak, don't want to take the strong decisions necessary that the likes of President Trump will in order to get their countries back on track, and are just so out of touch with the paradigm of politics, the sort of currents, the political way of travel is moving in because of the problems that they created, that they're rendering themselves rapidly irrelevant with an entire generation of people that are coming up and involving themselves in politics. So yeah, centrist dadism is the complete antithesis to what was called the cruel kids table on the front cover of New York Magazine, which is attractive, vibrant, strong, and ascendant.
And I think what's also really interesting, Connor, is you look at the mainstream media, and really all of our big news organisations, British Broadcasting Corporation, Woke ITV, Sly News, Channel 4, they are staffed by the equivalent of centrist dads. Obviously, there is also the annoying centrist mum in the form of Beth Rigby and Ruth Davidson and Harriet Harman, who host the awful Electoral Dysfunction podcast. And I really have noticed that the coverage of Donald Trump specifically, but I think this will also bleed over to Nigel Farage, has become almost deranged because they're not getting their way. Any semblance of impartiality has just been thrown out the window.
Yeah, I wouldn't actually use centrist mom. I'd use more sort of school mom, because they don't tolerate any kind of disruption from some of the precocious kids at the back of the class who, because they're bored with just reading out of a textbook or listening to them drone on about a disinteresting topic at the front before a whiteboard, they make a few jokes and try and make some friends, and they shriek histrionically about that interruption. Donald Trump basically represents the kind of person, the class clown, who's very bright and actually, you know, far out ahead of their teaching pace, so he gets bored and decides to be a bit funny, who just doesn't respect their authority and says no. And you shouldn't respect the authority of these kinds of people. Again, Sky News is completely discredited, not least of all for saying diversity is our strength outside the courthouse for the sentencing of Axel Ruder Cabana, but also hiring Harriet Harman. I mean, she replaced Jess Phillips, of course. So Jess Phillips is a particularly odious character for many reasons, not just lying about my Liz Truss interview, but also blocking the grooming gang inquiring in Oldham. Harriet Harman was such a fool as to be duped by the paedophile information exchange while working for Liberty. Now, she might say all sorts of evil things about Nigel Farage, calling reform a threat to democracy. Hell, if she knew who I was, she'd have a field day. But at least I haven't been a useful idiot for child abuse campaigners throughout my career. So I think that those sort of black marks on the records of centrist dads and lefty school moms in politics prevent them from being credible to people like me. And the fortunate thing is my generation, which I hope is trending in the same direction as France, Germany, and America with youth politics, will fortunately replace that political paradigm with something that improves our country rather than destroys it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, in some ways it is beautiful seeing them losing. I do worry, though, Connor, for the people who still rely on the mainstream media for the news. And of course, that is a increasingly lower proportion of the population, but still, we can't deny that there are some folk who are not part of this revolution and will just switch on the British Broadcasting Corporation or Woke ITV or Sly News. And I just wanted to show you two examples that I picked up from earlier this week, showing that change of language and get you to react. The first is from Sly News, and then the second is a discussion, an apparently impartial discussion between Tom Bradby, the presenter of ITV News, and its political editor, Robert Peston.
Some huge, surprising news here at Sky News this morning.
Sorry, that's not the one, but I think if we just go to the ITV clip, we should have that.
Look, we've often talked, haven't we, about what Keir Starmer is going to do if Donald Trump more and more departs from the values that we as nations have shared pretty much harmoniously, give or take, you know, since the Second World War and indeed before that. Things like this really do seem to suggest a fork in the road. But how does Keir Starmer handle that?
We know the US president, of course, is a real estate man at heart. For him, foreign policy is partly about expansion and aggression. But we also know from his first term in office that he prefers to adopt the so-called madman theory, behaving like he's capable of just about anything, saying crazy things. The more outlandish, the better, to force leaders to take action. He's 3 weeks into Trump 2.0, and we're starting to get used to this daily circus.
I mean, Connor, they don't even try and hide it, do they?
No, but the interesting thing, Dan, is when I was sitting there watching that, I just realized it coded as an endorsement to us. It feels like we're watching two TV screens at the same time, or the same TV screen, and coming to two completely different narratives, right? So when the American media saw Donald Trump get shot, they didn't pause for a day and reflect on, oh, how are we contributing to a climate of fear that makes the most febrile minds among us want to blow the brains off of now the most popular elected incumbent president. No, instead, we're just going to keep calling him a Nazi and sort of outsource our hysteria to the most deranged and armed members of the American public. And so our media are basically doing the same thing. But I'm wondering, and maybe the Telegraph polling that says that a majority of the British public actually support Trump's policies indicate this. I'm wondering if our public, despite the media hysteria, or perhaps in direct proportion to how hysterical the media get, are just drifting away from them in real time, because I'm listening to that and thinking, yeah, it's completely sensible for Trump to adopt the madman theory. Yeah, it's completely sensible for him to break away from the post-war consensus that has impoverished our nations and imported, under the guise of legislation that was meant to protect Dutch Jews fleeing the Nazis, North African rapists who frustrate the deportation process with appeal to the right to the family life when they molested their own blooming children. I think the public might be turning around and going, yeah, considering the evidence of my own eyes is that my country's getting worse, but you keep hammering on about democratic norms, despite the country being run by an unelected shadow government that I can never root out no matter how many elections I do. Yeah, I think I'm going to pick the so-called orange madman over you, no matter how much you scaremonger. And I wonder if that similar impact, the same rhetoric about Trump, will have a parallel in the UK in the next election to come.
Totally. It is funny, though, that they believe it's completely possible for them to throw impartiality out of the window when they're talking about international politics. Now, are they going to feel they have that same arrogance to do that when it comes to UK politics? Only time will tell. But look, do stand by, Connor Tomlinson. Much more from you in just 1 minute. And I'm not sure if you've heard today about this story in regards to Gino D'Acampo. It is astonishing. It is truly, truly astonishing. Woke ITV going after one of its own stars for behavior that it actively encouraged, and providing so much more coverage on this story about Gino D'Acampo than they ever did about the Pakistani Muslim rape gangs. So I'm going to show you what is going on here, and I promise you it is worth sticking around for that. So back with Connor Tomlinson in just 1 minute. But first, something really important to talk to you about. Scammers and spammers who are out there to ruin your life. We've all experienced more and more of those spam emails, text messages, and robo phone calls. Not only are they annoying and really time-consuming to deal with, but they usually represent a gross invasion of your private information that can cause vast reputational and financial damage. And I mean, how the heck did they get your information in the first place? Well, it's likely as a result of data brokers who know everything about you, your health information, relationship status, mortgage details, so much more actually, and then sell it for a profit. These data brokers can directly or indirectly expose sensitive information to bad actors, putting you at risk of identity theft. The number of data breaches worldwide rises every year. According to the annual data breach report by the Identity Theft Resource Center, it actually went up by 72% in 2023. This means that you and your loved ones are at a constantly increasing risk of data breaches as growing lists of data brokers hold your personal information. That has then been sold or published online without you even knowing about it. Let me tell you how shocking the consequences can be. Health insurance companies could actually raise your rates based on your online activity. Huge loans have been taken under people's names without them even knowing about it. and scammers have even started to use AI to, wait for it, mimic the voices of friends and family to trick victims into sending them money. These imposter scams rely entirely on the voice data they can find online. While you can ask these data brokers to delete your personal information, the process takes hundreds of hours to do manually and requires repetition. But the good news is that today I have a solution for you that I use and personally endorse. Go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off an annual plan. Now, Incogni reaches out to data brokers on your behalf, requests your personal data removal, and handles any objections from their side. The whole process is automated, ensuring that your data stays off the market by conducting repeated removals and taking your data down if it pops up again. That's what makes the yearly subscription especially advantageous. Now, I do the annual plan so that I'm constantly being taken off these lists. It truly is a simple process. Create an account, grant Incogni the right to work for you, and they will contact the data brokers on your behalf to request your personal data removal. It has helped me so much. You can go to incogni.com/outspoken and get 60% off. That's 60% off an annual plan right now. It could be the most important decision you make. But now, back to the show. Breaking right now, woke ITV has launched an astonishing and bizarre witch hunt against one of its own biggest stars, Gino D'Acampo, for so-called unacceptable behaviour that took place while he was filming all of ITV's biggest shows over the past 14 years. Now, I find this whole thing completely extraordinary for a whole number of reasons. Firstly, woke ITV provided acres of coverage to this special report last night, acres, about half of their news bulletin, far more than woke ITV has ever dedicated in a single bulletin to the Pakistani rape gang scandals. So let that sink in. The second point is, and look, I'm going to be honest with you, some of this behaviour seems a little bit unsavoury, but this guy is being made out as if he is now the new Jimmy Savile or the new Harvey Weinstein, when in fact what he did was tell inappropriate jokes. And those inappropriate jokes, by the way, which were quite sexualised, were the types of jokes that he told on air on woke ITV for years. In fact, look, they encouraged his behaviour. There he was, completely naked, for example, on This Morning, where the innuendo was constant. As Peter Lloyd, who is a campaigner for men, posted on X, this is laughable. They sexually exploited him in a way that would never happen to a woman. I hope he sues them. And honestly, when you see how ITV has turned, I'm sure you will agree with me, even if you don't like the jokes that Gino told, this is a completely over-the-top reaction. Remember, by the way, Gino D'Acampo was presented on ITV up until a few months ago, but this is how the special report was announced by Charlene White last night, as if it was the biggest, most important story in the world.
An exclusive ITV investigation into allegations of sexual inappropriate and intimidating behaviour by celebrity chef Gino D'Acampo. Dozens of alleged victims have come forward to tell ITV News about their experiences of 12 years. They described behaviour which they claim was unacceptable, distressing and horrendous. D'Acampo told ITV News he firmly denied the allegations, adding that they were deeply upsetting, and warning that this special report from our correspondent Sejal Karia contains details and language which you may find upsetting.
So that was how it was introduced. And then we got a succession of stories. And look, I will repeat for anyone who thinks that I am defending the specific jokes that Gino D'Acampo told. I'm not. But remember, this was over the course of nearly 2 decades, at a time when Gino D'Acampo was known on ITV as this sexually provocative guy. It was a big part of his persona.
Lena, not her real name, worked on several of Gino D'Acampo's shows, including Gordon, Gino and Fred's Road Trip in 2018.
Without saying hello, good morning, he just announced loudly that he felt like that morning. I really feel like a this morning. And off he went. How can you think that that sort of teenage boy behaviour is appropriate in a 40-something man while he works in a position of highest power?
Okay, well, a few things to pick up on there. Yes, it is teenage boy behaviour. Yes, it is immature. But it was behaviour that ITV actively encouraged from Gino D'Acampo on shows before The Watershed, like This Morning, and then after The Watershed on programmes like Celebrity Juice. This was his persona. So is it any surprise that he took that persona into his filming? What is most bizarre is that ITV is now, even though this was their star, their guy, is now washing their hands of him altogether and reporting on it as if they are just an observing party.
Gino D'Acampo's been the host of one of ITV's longest-running game shows, Family Fortunes. But tonight, ITV News understands the series filmed in 2023 is not currently scheduled for broadcast, and ITV has no plans to work with Gino D'Acampo.
Wonder how they found that out. Just running down the hallway. Connor Tomlinson, let me bring you back in on this host of Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters and the Deprogram podcast with the New Culture Forum. Now, Connor, I know you are a very upstanding, respectable gentleman, and I'm sure that you don't find Gino's saucy humour very funny, right? And that's fine. But do you understand that this is very odd for ITV to now turn on Gino D'Acampo, having been completely complicit in creating this highly sexualized persona for the past 10 years at least?
Yeah, breaking news, Italian man obsessed with sex. More breaking news, Japanese, too polite. I'm not particularly shocked about any of this. And as you say, ITV were encouraging it. It's just like, it's very similar to the Greg Wallace story, right? I wouldn't act this way in the workplace. I don't think anyone I've ever worked with is going to come out of the woodwork and say that I have. I find it a little bit cringe, to be honest. But we can't pretend that a man who went through the 90s with lads mag culture or had sort of 30 years of sitcoms and carry-ons preceding him that encouraged this exact kind of humor, the innuendo, the sexualized comments, the interplay between men and women, and then worked for a station which made it his brand identity. So he did naked chef bits and then went on Celebrity Juice calling Holly Willoughby Holly Willabooby with Keith Lemon. You can't pretend that this wasn't encouraged, capitalized on. It was the norm. And so, yeah, I wouldn't behave that way in this workplace. But I also think this is, as well, a kind of storm in a teacup, right? It's a direct consequence of putting very sensitive to power dynamics, feminist-minded women in the same office as 90s lads mag culture. And you're always going to get these kinds of culture clashes when you've got that ideology going at it. It's what my friend Nina Power calls a puritanical society. There's a prurient, very obsessive interest in sex. It's in every advert, every music video, every joke on TV after The Watershed. But then you also got a very puritanical attitude to specifically the way that men interact with women, whereas, you know, women can be as sexually forward as they like and be celebrated on social media for being empowered, for sleeping with 100 men on camera. But if a man makes a slightly tasteless, sexist joke, like Greg Wallace or Gino D'Acampo may have done, then we all go up in arms and we do another Me Too movement. I'm just sort of really sick and tired of it. These people are so absolutely self-obsessed. There are, as you said, way more important stories like the grooming gangs to be covering. And the idea that ITV needs to dedicate headline news to this when they knew it was going on for years and made money off of it, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, the thing is that no one in a situation like this, Connor, thinks for a single second either about the impact that this now has on Gino D'Acampo. And at the end of the day, no one is accusing of him doing a single illegal thing. All of these issues should have been dealt with at the time if complaints were made. The people who are making the accusations are all hiding behind anonymity. So we don't know if these people are driven by any type of malice. And trust me, it happens in situations like this. But the bigger point for me is that ITV are just almost acting as if they have no duty of care now over this guy. And you should see the reports today on all of the mainstream media. There is just like a complete slavish desire now to cancel him and to say that Gino D'Acampo's over and no one should ever work with him again. And look, I know what this is like. I know what happened when there was hysteria over my situation on GB News with Lawrence Fox. And when everyone backs away from you, when everyone drops you, when you're cancelled like this, it has such a significant impact. And I just find ITV's behaviour totally terrible, because it's like now they have no responsibility for Gino D'Acampo. They don't give a damn about him. He can rot in hell as far as they're concerned. Yet he was their star for all of these years, and they clearly knew what his shtick was. And then I think the other thing that I have a big problem with, Connor, is this idea of offence archaeology, because times do change. And again, people will try and say, oh, Dan, you're just trying to excuse terrible behaviour. I'm not. But look, I worked in newsrooms, Connor, from, you know, the noughties, and things were wild, because woke had not entered into the workplace. And there was just an acceptance that jokes and sort of dark humour and all of that type of thing were part of a workplace culture. And what I think is so terrible here is that Gino D'Acampo has been judged by extreme woke values 12 years on.
Yeah, I would point out as well that as far as I'm aware, he's not only been accused of nothing illegal, but nothing at all physical. It's all sort of rude comments that, again, ITV were happy to make his brand identity for years. It's the same sort of cheeky, chappy stuff that Greg Wallace was accused of. I just want to point out that throughout all of this is all hearsay, particularly anonymized hearsay. And so there is the possibility, not only, Dan, that this is offence archaeology, as was the case with your instance with Lawrence Fox on GB News, but also, and I don't wish to discredit anyone that would like to come forward with anything actually substantial if something bad really has happened, but this could also just be made up. Like the same with your false allegations that were also hanging over your head while working at GB News from an ex-partner. It is possible that people are either exaggerating these claims or dogpiling on. You know, I don't want a culture where people can, the worst kinds of people, can be believed as soon as they say something very bad about a person, very damaging, without being held to any standard of evidence, and that person's treated as guilty to be proven innocent. So, look, I don't know Gino D'Acampo from Adam. I probably wouldn't have behaved that way personally. It's not in my temperament. But then the idea that this is also the most important story and the most abhorrent way he could have behaved, when he was sharing the programme with Philip Schofield, I might add, I can't be made to be outraged, I'm afraid.
No, I couldn't agree more. And all I would say is that, trust me, false allegations are made. Trust me, when you work in the TV industry, there's a lot of reasons why people are actuated by malice, why they do want to see you fall. And I completely agree that we now live in a culture where we allow woke media organizations to operate as judge, jury, and executioner. And I'm sorry, I don't trust ITV's motives here. Why are they doing this now, Connor? Why are they turning on one of their own stars now? What is that about? There's going to be a lot behind the scenes that people don't know. And just remember, and I think people will very clearly see that we have provided both sides of this, but just remember, Gino D'Acampo has denied all of these allegations. He's not said, oh, there's some truth to this, or I acted badly in the past. He has issued categorical denials of these claims, and yet ITV went ahead. And I just think shame on them in this case. But Connor Tomlinson, so brilliant to have you, host of Deprogrammed on the New Culture Forum and Tomlinson Talks on Lotus Eaters. Have a wonderful weekend, Connor.
You too, Dan.
Thank you so much. And thank you for your company today. But you know, because it's Friday, we announce the worst Briton in the world this week. You guys are incredible. What a community we are forming. Over 30,000 votes already. And the winner is very, very clear. So let's have a look. In fourth position, Nicola Marfleet. She is the HMP Woodhill governor who is behind the isolation of Tommy Robinson. In third place, the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, Rachel from Accounts, Rachel Thieves, Robotic Rachel, whatever you want to call her, for destroying our economy. In second place, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. She was nominated because she's looking to make Islamophobia illegal. But it's not even close. And I'm going to have to think about this because otherwise he's going to win every week at this rate. But there was a very good reason behind this. It's Slippery Starmer with 84% of the vote. And it is specifically in regards to the gutless way in which he decided to turn up to Southport secretly. Because he was just so gutless. And oh my goodness, you guys are so funny. John Brereton has written, what a lineup. They should all be in prison for treachery to the British people. And Andrew Torrens says the worst thing about this Labour mob is they make the SNP government up here, so obviously watching from Scotland, hello, my favourite place, look vaguely competent. That's how bad Starmer's lot is. But I think I am going to have to think about this though, aren't I? Because we can't just have Starmer winning every single week. So let's be creative with our nominations. But the worst person, the worst Briton in the world this week, at least, most certainly Slippery Starmer. Thank you for your company all week. We move on over to Substack now, though, www.outspoken.live. Angela Levin is standing by. There has been overnight the bombshell release of a major new book on the royal family, which makes a whole number of claims. What's fascinating, from the servants, these are the people who really know, and it includes the suggestion that Meghan Markle may have flirted with Prince William during her time in the royal family. So, of course, Angela is Prince Harry's biographer. We're going to go into all of these revelations, do a real deep dive over on Substack now, www.outspoken.live. Thank you for your company all week. I hope you have an amazing, restful weekend. Please do join me back at 5 p.m. UK time, Monday, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell if you are watching on YouTube or Rumble. I promise to keep fighting for you, although we're not wrapped up quite for the week, because I hope to see you on Substack for the after show with Angela Levin in just a couple of minutes' time.